Okay, so uh, you know that feeling when you're finally able to silence your phone after a long day, but then the hum of the refrigerator, the neighbor's dog, even your own breath starts to feel loud. It's like our world just doesn't do quiet anymore.
It's true. We're so used to constant noise and stimulation, silence can feel almost jarring.
Exactly. And that actually, now that I think about it, perfectly sets the scene for your deep dive request this week. Elder Bednar's April 2024 conference talk, Be Still and Know That I Am God. You sent this in, and I gotta say, diving into this while prepping for our chat had me thinking hard about how I can actually find some stillness amidst the daily grind.
Yeah, it's something we all struggle with. What's fascinating about that talk is how it starts with a journalist, someone who's basically paid to be plugged into the world, suddenly facing the profound stillness of the celestial room in the temple.
I was struck by that too. It wasn't just about the lack of noise, right? The talk makes it clear this journalist was feeling something deeper, something almost unsettling in its intensity.
Right, and I think that's Elder Bednar's point. Stillness isn't just about the absence of sound, right? It's about creating a space for something else to enter in a connection with the divine.
Which, well, it makes you wonder, what is it about a space like the celestial room that allows for that kind of connection?
Well, if you think about it, temples are intentionally designed to be set apart from the world. They're places of peace, where we can step away from the everyday and focus on eternal things.
So by creating that physical distance, it makes it easier to create a spiritual distance too, from the noise and demands of our lives.
Exactly. It's like hitting the pause button on all the external stimulation so we can tune in to something deeper, something more meaningful.
Which I think ties in so well with the historical context of the scripture itself. Be still and know that I am God. At first I was a little thrown when the talk jumped back to the saints in Missouri in 1833.
Yeah.
Like, what does that have to do with a journalist in a temple? Yeah. But the more I thought about it,
It's brilliant, isn't it? Because those saints weren't exactly experiencing physical stillness, were they? They were facing persecution, uncertainty, real threats to their safety.
the opposite of peaceful.
Right.
So when the Lord commanded them to be still, it had to be about something more than just external quiet. It had to be about finding that inner peace, that trust in God, even when everything around them felt chaotic.
Exactly. And, that need for an unshakable inner foundation, that's where the talk shifts to that powerful metaphor of building on the rock of Christ.
Okay, yes, that visual of the foundation always sticks with me. But how does that translate to our lives today?
Oh,
We're not exactly laying down physical foundations.
right. But we are building spiritual foundations. Think of it this way. Just like a house needs a strong foundation to withstand storms, we need a strong connection to Christ to withstand the storms of life.
And those anchor pins he talks about, those are the covenants we make.
Exactly. And just like those pins secure the foundation to the bedrock, our covenants secure us to Christ. They become a source of strength and stability, especially when life gets tough.
So it's like, imagine going through a major life upheaval, job loss, illness,
Mhm.
divorce. If we've got that deep connection to Christ, that bedrock beneath us, we might still feel the winds, but we won't be uprooted.
Exactly. And that feeling of being grounded, of knowing who you are and whose you are, that's where true stillness comes from.
Okay, so we're talking about a really active kind of stillness then, not just zoning out, but actively building this connection with Christ so that no matter what chaos is happening around us, we've got that inner peace.
I think that's a great way to put it. And that actually leads perfectly into the next part of the talk where Elder Bednar gets into the how. Because building that foundation, cultivating that connection, it's an ongoing process.
And that's where those practical applications come in, right?
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to talk about stillness, but it's another to actually live it.
Absolutely. And I think many people might be surprised by the places Elder Bednar points us to for finding that stillness in our lives.
Because when I think stillness, I think like meditation retreat on a mountaintop. Not exactly practical for, dropping the kids off at soccer practice.
Right. But what's so powerful about this talk is that it brings this concept down to earth, like literally. It emphasizes the importance of not just sacred time, but also holy places.
And then it's not an either or, right? It's not enough to like go to church on Sunday and then consider yourself good on the stillness front for the week.
Exactly. It's about cultivating that spirit of stillness throughout our week. And that's where I think this idea of the home as a sanctuary comes in.
Which is so interesting because I feel like we often see our homes as the opposite of a sanctuary. It's where the to-do list lives and the laundry piles up. And, well, you get the idea.
I think we all relate to that. But Elder Bednar actually calls the home the ultimate combination of sacred time and holy place.
Which, when you think about it, makes perfect sense. It's where we have the most control over our environment, over how we structure our time. It's where we can really put these principles of stillness into practice, not just for ourselves, but for our families too.
And isn't that a powerful thought? That we can actually create these pockets of peace and connection in the midst of our everyday lives.
Right.
That we don't have to escape to the mountains to experience the divine, but that we can invite the divine into our homes.
So how do we actually do that? What are some practical ways we can turn our homes into these havens of stillness? Because let's be real, not all of us have the luxury of a dedicated meditation room.
Right, and the talk acknowledges that. It's not about grand gestures, but about small, intentional changes. One idea Elder Bednar suggests is creating a designated quiet space in your home.
And it doesn't have to be anything fancy, right? Like it could just be a corner of your bedroom or a comfy chair you love. The important thing is that it's a space that's intentionally set apart for stillness and reflection.
Exactly. And maybe you add a visual reminder to that space, a piece of artwork, a quote, a scripture that inspires a sense of peace. Or maybe it's something as simple as having a basket of books that nourish your soul, ready to be picked up when you need a few minutes of quiet.
Oh, I love that. And it doesn't just have to be about physical objects either. Like one thing I've been trying to be more mindful of is creating little rituals throughout my day that help me reset and reconnect.
Tell me more about that. What kind of rituals?
Well, for example, instead of scrolling through my phone first thing in the morning, I've been trying to start my day with a few minutes of journaling. Just getting my thoughts and feelings out on paper, setting an intention for the day. It's amazing how much calmer I feel when I start my day that way, instead of immediately, like, bombarding myself with information.
That's fantastic, and it really speaks to that idea of being intentional with our time and attention.
And honestly, sometimes the most impactful rituals are the simplest ones. Like turning off notifications during family dinner, actually putting our phones away and being present with the people around us.
Absolutely. Those little moments of connection, of putting down our devices and really seeing and hearing each other, those can be incredibly powerful.
And it's not about being perfect, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to pretend I never get sucked into my phone or that my house is always a picture of tranquility. But I think just being more mindful of the atmosphere we're creating in our homes, that's a huge step.
You're absolutely right. It's about progress, not perfection. And I think that's something that's really important to remember when it comes to finding stillness in general. It's a practice, something we have to cultivate over time.
You wouldn't expect to run a marathon without training for it, right? You have to build up those spiritual muscles the same way a little bit each day.
It is. Yeah, it's a really good analogy. And it kind of highlights how this isn't like a one-time thing. It's about making space for stillness in our lives consistently. So it
Right.
becomes less of a like a destination and more like a muscle memory.
So we're training ourselves to access that inner peace, that connection with the divine, even when life gets loud.
Precisely. It's
Yeah.
almost like we're building a well, within
Right.
ourselves. In the beginning, we might have to dig deep, work hard to clear away the distractions, but over time, that well of stillness, it becomes more accessible and we learn to draw from it more easily, even in the midst of challenges.
That's a beautiful way to think about it. And it
Yeah.
makes me wonder, like, what are some of the fruits of this? Of cultivating that stillness in our lives? Like, how does it actually change us?
Well, in the talk, Elder Bednar suggests that stillness is essential for hearing God's voice. When we're constantly bombarded with noise and distractions, it's easy to miss those subtle promptings, those whispers of the Spirit. But when we create space for silence, for reflection, we become much more attuned to those spiritual whispers.
It's like we're finally turning down the volume on all the external noise
Yeah.
so we can actually hear what God is trying to tell us.
Exactly. And that increased sensitivity to the Spirit, it kind of spills over into every area of our lives. It allows us to navigate challenges with more grace and resilience. It helps us to see the world and the people in it with greater love and compassion.
And it all starts with making that conscious choice to create space for stillness. Whether it's through those small intentional changes in our homes, or through dedicated time for prayer and scripture study, or even just taking 5 minutes to breathe deeply and quiet our minds.
And I think the key takeaway here is that there's no right way to do it.
Mhm.
What works for one person might not work for another, and that's okay. The important thing is finding what resonates with you, what helps you to connect with that inner stillness, and then making it a consistent part of your life.
So for someone listening who's feeling like totally overwhelmed by the idea of adding one more thing to their to-do list, what would you say? Where do they even begin?
Start small. I think that's the biggest thing. Don't underestimate the power of just 5 minutes of quiet time each day. Find a spot in your home where you can sit comfortably, silence your phone, and just focus on your breath. Let go of any thoughts that come up and just be present in that moment.
And if they get interrupted, you know, if the dog barks or the kids need something,
It's okay. It's not about achieving perfect silence. Just gently guide your attention back to your breath. Over time, you'll find that it becomes easier to access that stillness, even amidst the chaos of everyday life. And you might be surprised by the ripple effects it has on your well-being, your relationships, your entire life.
like that old saying, in the stillness there is clarity. In the quiet there is wisdom.
Beautifully said.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to find a little stillness ourselves. To everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Elder Bednar's message. Remember, even amidst the noise and demands of our modern world, stillness is always available to us. We just have to choose to create space for it.